People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. My guest tonight is acclaimed American physicist and best-selling author, MIT professor, Dr. Alan Lightman. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Sonali.
Professor, speak to us first about what specifically brings you to Sri Lanka. You had several engagements during your stay, one of which is this interview as well. And speak to us also about your relationship with late veteran artist Jayantha Premachandra.
In 1979, my wife and I were taking a trip around the world before making babies. Mm-hmm. And one of the places we went was Copenhagen. We stayed in a small hotel there. And it happened that the Sri Lankan artist, Jayantha Premachandra, and his wife and 8-year-old daughter, Lanka, were also staying at the hotel. We became friends with the family over a period of a few days. And then over the next 10 years, I stayed in touch with Jayantha. And then in 1988, almost 10 years later, I was planning an exhibition of Jayantha's work in the U.S. He had never exhibited in the U.S., although he had exhibited all over the world. Mm-hmm. And his family was going to come to the U.S. and stay with my wife and me at our home. We had children by that time. And 1 month before they were supposed to arrive, I got this startling letter that Jayantha had passed away suddenly at a very young age, I think age 53. Then 30 years went by in which I had no contact with the family, with the wife and daughter, 30 years. And then about 4 years ago, I got this message on Facebook starting out, "I am Lanka Premachandra, do you remember me?" It was the daughter, and she told me that she was having a retrospective exhibition of her father's paintings. She had started a foundation called the Jayantha Premachandra Foundation and invited me to come speak and to attend the inauguration of this exhibition. Mm. And also the Sri Lankan Tourist Board offered to sponsor my trip here, and the American Embassy also offered to help sponsor the trip. So it was such an amazing story that I had to come.
Alan, you've written extensively about a concept called spiritual materialism, which is basically a scientific view of the world, but also embracing spiritual experiences. How do the two coexist?
Well, being a materialist, I think that the world is made out of atoms and molecules and nothing more. That's what I mean by materialism.
Right.
And so I think that all mental experiences, including consciousness and other experiences, happen in the material brain.
Right.
And so I think going along with that view, I believe that some of the experiences we have that I associate with spirituality, like feeling connected to nature, feeling connected to other people, the appreciation of beauty, falling in love, I believe that these experiences all take place in the brain. Hmm. And so they can be explained in terms of the workings of the brain. In fact, I think they have evolutionary origins, that all of these experiences, like feeling part of something larger than yourself, had survival benefit 1 million years ago in our early history.
Right. There is increasingly a yearning for deeper purpose and meaning on the basis that there has to be more to life than just the mundane. But this capitalistic world is geared for disconnectedness. How do we bridge this gap?
Well, I think that the capitalistic world is concerned with material comfort and money. I mean, money is the basis of capitalism. But the human experiences that we have that are part of my understanding of spirituality, of course, have nothing to do with money. I think that we need to slow down and think about who we are and what our values are. The world is moving far too fast for its own good, which I think has been brought about mainly by the internet and social media. The speed of communication has always determined the pace of life. And now you see people looking at their smartphones every 5 minutes, checking off boxes on their to-do list, and we're not taking the time to think about who we are and what our values are. In other words, our inner self. We have sacrificed that for this technological progress. And I say progress with quotes around it because I'm not sure there's really progress. But that is part of the technological world that we live in. I don't think that technology in itself is a bad thing. It does many good things, but I think that the technology itself has no values. It's how we human beings use technology, where we impose our own value system. So we need to learn how to slow down and listen to that quiet inner voice, which is our inner self.
The human experience is so multidimensional, but to be our highest selves, we need to look within, and this requires a profound exploration of the self, diving deep into our own psyche, also holding a mirror to parts of ourselves that are uncomfortable to look at.
Well, Socrates said, know thyself. And you really have to know yourself before you can have relationships with other people, I think. I admire Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist myself. But my understanding of Buddhism is that when you see things about yourself that you don't like, that are uncomfortable, you should just accept yourself as who you are. You know, if you're constantly trying to improve yourself, you're not accepting yourself. And so that's the way that I would view seeing things about yourself that are uncomfortable, accepting yourself. And I think another dimension of Buddhism which I admire is compassion and gratitude. So if we can have feelings for other people, if we can try to help people who are less fortunate than we are, I think that is a beautiful way of joining our inner self with the outer world.
Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, there's a part where he says, the more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is and the more he actualizes himself. We are increasingly in an individualistic and self-absorbed world. How do we bridge this gap?
Well, the individualistic world that we're in, that you refer to, I think is more true of the Western world than the Asian world.
Correct, yeah.
And I went to the Foreign Correspondents Club in Tokyo a few years ago, and all of the journalists there were exchanging cards, their business cards. And I noticed that all the Western journalists had their own name in large letters in the center of the card and their publication's name in smaller letters in the corner. And all of the Asian journalists, it was just the opposite. They had their publication's name in large letters and at the center of the card, and their own name in smaller letters. So I think that the emphasis on the individual is more of a Western phenomena. I mean, I'm sure that it's true somewhat all over the world, but it's more of a Western phenomena. And I think that the ideal is to be somewhere in between, to appreciate the community that you're in, but also tend to your own personal needs. Of course, I mentioned Socrates. He comes from the Western world, but I do think it's what he said is know thyself, or only know thyself, is very important, that we should do inner exploration before we can really be compassionate about other people. I'm not sure whether that addresses your question or not.
It does. Since you work at the intersection of art, the humanities, and science, to not die is not to live. Over and above a conformist life of rule following and church going or temple going, how must we create a good life, a life that feels good to live?
Well, I've been thinking about this question a lot because I'm 75 years old and beginning to see the full arc of my life and thinking about approaching the end of my life. And how do you prepare for the end, which I think is related to how you live a good life. And I think that what I want to do for myself and what I would recommend for other people is to live a life where you don't have many regrets. I mean, we all make mistakes. We do things that we wish we hadn't done. We make bad decisions. But on the whole, to me, living a good life is thinking, well, that went pretty well. You know, I had friends. I had loved ones. I think I contributed a little bit to the world. I made the world a little bit better place. I helped people who had less advantages than I did. And to me, that's the good life. It's not simply having good food and driving a nice car. It's feeling like, I think having meaningful relationships with other people is really an important part of a good life. Many of us have children, not all of us, but to me, I feel that's a very satisfying part of having lived on this planet. It's really amazing that each one of us is a totally unique entity in the universe. That the universe will never see us again, each one of us. We're unique. We have a unique set of DNA. We have a unique set of experiences. And every one of us is a unique thing in the cosmos. And when we pass away, that entity will never come again. And that's a pretty staggering thought. I find that to be a precious aspect of being alive, that no matter what circumstances we're in, whether we're born into a poor family or a rich family or an educated family or an uneducated family, we are lucky to be alive. I mean, each woman has 300,000 eggs, and each man has 10 million sperms. And every one of those combinations of egg and sperm produces a unique individual. So each one of us is one of 1,000,000,000,000 to 1 odds that particular egg and a particular sperm came together. I think there's another way in which, and this is related to the good life, there's another way in which life is very special, and that is that living, and I'm speaking now as a scientist, that the matter in the universe that is in living form is 1/1,000,000,000 of 1/1,000,000,000 of all matter in the universe, like a few grains of sand on the Gobi Desert.
Yikes.
That the vast majority of material in the universe is in non-living form. So not only are we one in trillions that a particular egg and a particular sperm got together, but the fact that we're in that few grains of sand in the Gobi Desert that is in living form. And so what does that mean? Well, for me, that tiny fraction of material in the universe that is in living form is the only way that the universe can comment on itself, can be a spectator and witness itself. I mean, scientists think that there are other universes that don't have the right conditions for life at all. And in those universes, they might have waterfalls and snowflakes and trees, but there's no intelligent life to comment on that. So we are the cosmic spectators of the universe. And that gives us a kind of responsibility, I think.
But do we exercise collectively that responsibility? Across the world, we see the world at war.
Yes.
And we see so much of hatred, so much of xenophobia. The moral apathy of the powerful nations is terrifying. And it almost requires grotesque violence for people to pay attention to the atrocities.
Yes. Well, I don't think that most people in the world appreciate the specialness and privilege of simply being alive. Now, everything that I just said to you about the eggs and sperm and the few grains of sand in the Gobi Desert, most people don't think about that. And unfortunately, the human brain, which evolved over a couple of million years, it has aggressive tendencies, which at some point in the past had survival benefit in a Darwinian sense. And those aggressive tendencies, I think, are related to the wars that we have. Of course, we also have some very beautiful tendencies, like the instinct to create art, to create music, to write books, to try to understand the world, curiosity. But in order to survive, we had to have these aggressive tendencies as well, the desire for power. And I think that some of the wars that we have, maybe most of them, follow from the desire to have power and control. So human beings are very complicated. We have these positive tendencies and negative tendencies that were all part of surviving 1,000,000 years ago. And they're very deeply wired into our brains. And so even though our science and technology has developed exponentially fast, especially in the last 100 years, we still have primitive parts of our brains that were formed millions of years ago. That basic human nature has not changed much in the last 1,000,000 years, despite the tremendous advances of science and technology. I mean, if you took a smartphone back 100 years into the past and showed it to someone, they would think it was black magic. So I don't think that human nature has changed, has evolved much. And the moral apathy that you were referring to in many countries' leaders, I don't think that you could say that an entire country has moral apathy, but certainly some leaders do. That I think that is related to certain instincts of survival, of power and control that developed a million years ago.
Why are we so averse to the reality of death? Why are we in denial when it comes to the fact that we all die, but we ignore it? We act like it isn't really applicable to us.
I think there are two things that frighten us about death. One is the idea of death, the fact that there will be an infinite period of time of nothingness unless you believe in an afterlife, which of course many people do. But the concept of losing the self. And the other thing that causes our fear of death is just the physical pain and suffering that we might have in the last months or years when we're sick. Of course, some people drop dead suddenly of a heart attack, but many people have a period of months or a year where they're in physical pain. So that is also something that scares us about death. But I think the idea of nothingness, of having an infinite period of time in which our self does not exist, is terrifying. We just can't imagine nothingness. You know, the closest we come to understanding nothingness or experiencing it is when we go into a deep sleep. But after a deep sleep, we always wake up.
Yeah.
And then you can look back and realize, well, there was a period of time where I didn't dream, I had no sensation, but you're looking back from a platform of wakefulness when you woke up. But when you die, that platform does not exist.
But shouldn't the fact that we die encourage us to be better human beings?
It should.
But it doesn't. It hasn't.
I don't know whether people think about death, about their deaths in that way. I think that, as you said, I think most people avoid thinking about it. I think we live, many of us, just for immediate pleasure. And maybe for some people that is the good life. You know, what is the good life is partly a subjective thing. I mean, I gave you my version of the good life, but there might be some people who say the good life is buying a Rolls-Royce car, wearing an Armani suit, and eating at a good restaurant every night.
Right.
Or having many lovers.
Yeah.
For some people, that might be the good life. So it's partly a subjective concept, I think. Of course, the Greek philosophers had an idea of what the good was, but it is an individual interpretation. I have a friend who's a psychologist, and I sometimes talk to him about why it is that people fear death. And he says that it's the loss of self, which I guess is a psychological term. But we have this sense of being an entity, of being that's separate from the world around us, of having an ego, of being able to think about the past and plan for the future, a memory of who we are. All of that is part of what the self is.
Yeah.
it's that voice in our minds that is constantly aware of who we are. And it's very frightening to think about the total loss of that. There is a gradual loss of self in people who have dementia. And I think that all of us know someone who has Alzheimer's or a similar disease. And as Alzheimer's progresses, there's first a loss of your memory, then a loss of where you are, then a loss of who you are, and gradually there's a loss of self, of everything that we associate with self. And I think that that's one of the things that frightens us about death. But I think if you can accept death as a natural phenomena, I mean, everything in nature passes away. Yeah. Even stars eventually burn out. Yeah. And if you can try to live a good life, whatever your definition of good is, so that when you reach near the end of your life, you don't have many regrets. And if you can accept death as a natural phenomena.
Where does morality come into the equation? And I'm asking this from the perspective of living in a morally repressed society in some aspects. How do you view this?
Well, do you view your society as morally repressed?
I would say that, and this is my personal opinion, there are aspects where we are repressed as a society from progress when it comes to things like marital rape, LGBTQ rights, which are almost non-existent.
In Sri Lanka?
Yes. At the moment. Although
it must be changing.
Change is forthcoming, there are issues with respect to cultural values, morality, and perceptions, misconceptions around them. So yes, it is problematic.
Yes. I mean, my own view of that is probably the same with yours. I would think that I agree that all of those are moral repressions, where there's some countries in the world where the things that you mentioned would be the natural order of things. And there are cultural differences about that. I think that people, whether they're men or women, whether they're straight or gay, whatever they should be able to make their own decisions. There should be a certain independence of the individual. And I would apply that principle to my concept of what's moral and immoral. And there's another concept that I usually fall back on when it comes to ethical considerations, and we're partly talking about ethics here, and that is the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is the one universal ethical principle that I try to abide by. And you can find that rule in many religions, even those religions that have repressive societies, in which it's a self-contradiction.
Alan, you're a scientist and a writer. Speak to us about the difference in the way scientists and artists view the world.
Well, I think there are differences, and there are also similarities. So I'll talk about the differences first. One difference is that scientists are always working on problems that they think have answers. And even if it may take 10 years to find the answer, there's something called the well-posed problem in science, which every graduate student in physics or chemistry or biology sort of absorbs through their skin. which is a problem that's stated with enough clarity and precision that you know it has a definite answer.
Yeah.
Whereas in the arts, there are many interesting questions that don't have definite answers. Like in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, why did the man kill the old lady? Raskolnikov, I think his name. The great German poet Rilke was asked by a younger poet, should I write? And Rilke said, you should only write if you cannot not write. You should love the questions themselves, like locked rooms or like books written in a very foreign tongue. So I think that for artists, the question is often more important than the answer, and many times the definite answer doesn't exist. You know, in a novel, once you understand a character completely, the character is dead for you, because real people have layers of complexity below the surface. Even the writer doesn't fully understand the characters. So I think that scientists work on questions with definite answers. Artists often work on things that don't have answers or can't even be formulated in terms of a question and an answer. And I think that we need, as human beings, we need questions with answers and questions without answers.
Yeah.
That both are part of being human. So another difference between the science and the arts I can illustrate by expository writing, which is a kind of writing where you have you're making an argument, you put together facts, you make an outline, and that sort of reflects the scientific enterprise. It's a well-reasoned, logical path. And in expository writing, we learn in school that it's always good form to start each paragraph with a topic sentence, which sort of names the idea of the paragraph. But a topic sentence in fiction writing is fatal. You don't want to tell your reader how to think about the paragraph. You want your reader to be blindsided and carried off to that magical place that you're trying to create, to be part of the scene. And if you tell your reader at the very beginning how she should think about the trip, it cancels the trip.
Right.
So those are some differences. I think some similarities is the creative process. I think it's very similar in the sciences and the arts, and I've experienced it both as a physicist and as a writer, that when you're in that creative zone, you lose all sense of your ego. You lose sense of where you are and who you are. You lose sense of time, and you're just in this magical place of creating. So I think that's a similarity. I think also that scientists and artists are both seeking truth. That in the sciences, it's truth in the external world, the world of masses and forces. And in the world of the artists, it's truth in the internal world, the world of the heart and the mind. So those are some similarities and differences.
Don't you think that the marriage between the two worlds is quite magical?
I do think it's quite magical.
Yeah.
And I've tried to participate in that marriage, maybe as a bridesmaid in my own career. I think that our universities and our educational system need more interdisciplinary courses, that we've gotten so specialized that now you can study a scientific course and not really understand how it relates to literature or art. Or you can study, you can take a humanities course and not really understand the way the world works physically, not understand Darwinian evolution, or not understand the second law of thermodynamics. And that specialization has allowed us to make a lot of progress, but we've also lost something with it, that the different groups of people can no longer talk to each other. We don't have the same vocabularies. And there's some problems like climate change that really require interdisciplinary work. Understanding climate change is not just a scientific problem, it's an economic problem, it's a social problem, it's a political problem, because you need political will to make the changes in industry that would preserve the climate. So there are many problems in the modern world that really demand the infusion of different disciplines. And I think that our educational systems should have, our universities should have courses that are fundamentally interdisciplinary, where people learn that seeing a problem from different perspectives and using different tools is really valuable and even essential.
Alan, when we speak about the wonder and fragility of human nature and reflect on our cosmic insignificance, how important is it for us to not solely be self-absorbed, but rather focus on the value of our relationships as being at the heart of our lives?
I have a wife, I have 2 children, 2 daughters, and 4 grandchildren.
Wow.
Each of my daughters has 2 children. And my relationships with them are the most valuable, the most life-enhancing, the richest part of my life. I think that relationships with other people is not only satisfying, but it's deeply ingrained in our psyche. That when we lived in caves 1 million years ago, that we had to get along with other people. We had to be part of a group. You had the hunters who went out and got food. You had the other people who stayed in the cave and kept the fire going, took care of the children. And if you didn't participate in the community, if you were cast out of the cave and you were on your own, it would mean almost certain death. So I think that our feelings for other people is really an essential part of our evolutionary history. And many people who are much wiser than I am, have talked about how satisfying it is to give of yourself to other people. And getting back to Socrates again, when he said, "Know thyself," I think that was really the first step of a 2-step process. Know yourself and then give to other people. The most satisfaction that I've ever had in my life has been when I've been able to give something to other people. So I think that human relationships are very, very important. We have a very good interviewer like yourself in the U.S. named Bill Moyers. And he had a television show that went for some years and where he interviewed various people. And he had one program where he interviewed people who were in their 80s and 90s years old. So they were at the end of their lives. And he asked them, looking back on your life, do you regret anything? And almost all of those people, many of them very successful materially, successful business people, they said, I wish that I had spent less time in the office and more time with my family and friends.
Alan, my final question to you. How do we come to terms with, how do we combat unconscionable political leadership? They hold our power in trust. And they are bound to hold this power in the best interests of the peoples. But this doesn't really happen. And we see the terrible effects of this.
Yes. Well, of course, in the United States, we have a terrible situation at the present time where we have people who are immoral, telling lies, corrupt, who have achieved positions of great power. And I'm very worried about democracy in the United States. But it's happening in many other countries around the world, in North Korea, China, Russia, Brazil, Iran. And someone who is an historian, who knows much more about this than I do, has pointed out that democracy, if you look at the long history of recorded history of human beings, going back, say, 3,000 years, that democracy, which I guess we can define as a government that is really for the people, where everybody gets a vote and not just an elite group, that really has occupied the minority of history, that most of human history has not been democratic. It's been where we have powerful, power-hungry, ambitious, immoral leaders.
Yeah.
So I think we're really fighting an uphill battle with insisting on democratic principles. And we just have to hope that that good will eventually triumph over evil, that that morality will triumph over immorality, that truth will triumph over lies. And human beings are very complicated. We have both the capacity for good and the capacity for evil, all within our psyches. And we just have to hope that I don't have any particular prescription except the hope that the good will eventually win out. And of course, there are countries in the world where it does, but we seem to be in a very dark period right now with terrible wars going on and dictatorial governments. Authoritarianism seems to be on the rise, and I blame globalism and the internet partly for that. So I think we need some help. I don't know where we're going to get it, but we need people who are speaking out and standing up for what is right. So maybe your program can help do that.
All right. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your very good preparation and your wonderful experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Alan Lightman. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next Friday. Good night.
Now the first things first, can I take a photograph of you please? Please put your hands in the